Moadim l'simcha and happy Passover. I'd like to say a few words that relate to the Haggadah and this time of year. And some of these ideas I'm taking from Sfat Emet. Sfat Emet, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib of Alter, was the second Rebbe of the Hasidic movement of Gur, who was born in the middle of the 19th century. And a lot of his writings are written probably by himself, some around the 1880s. In his book Sfat Emet, which means the words of truth or the speech of truth, he has a tendency to write both metaphorically, kabbalistically, and sometimes very cryptically, where he will say half an idea and then you have to sort of develop the idea and try to figure out what he's saying. Sometimes he actually says the idea in a different place and you have to connect it to that too. But he's definitely creative and very significant writer. And I just want to mention some of the things about Pesach. So I'm talking now from one of his essays on Pesach. A lot of things, by the way, he quotes from his grandfather. His grandfather, who was also a legalist, wrote a book called Chidushei Harim, and was the first Rebbe of Gur. He was basically brought up by his grandfather because he lost his father at the age of 8, and that's why his father was not the second Rebbe, but actually he was in Gur. Okay, so sometimes he'll say an idea, and he won't develop the idea. He'll just go on, and he'll expect you to understand what he wanted to say, which I always find interesting. For instance, he says here, I heard from my grandfather that the reason why they call the night of Passover, what we do on the night of Passover, a Seder, is based on what the Maharal said, that there is a special Seder, which means pattern, ala nisim niflaot. There is a pattern and sort of like a way of a systematic order of the miracles, and they don't happen just accidentally. And that's it. That's all he says, which is very interesting. It's true in the introduction to Gvurot Hashem, the Maharal of Prague does go very much into this idea of a systematic order of miracles. He has fascinating things to say about it, which I'm not going to go into now. I actually addressed this in another place. And but calling it the Seder, which is very interesting. So I think what he's trying to say, if I can sort of like sum it up in one or two sentences, is that the reason why we call it Seder as a system, because that the miracles in general follow a system. And so we are trying to relate to that miracle of leaving Egypt on the night of the Seder, and therefore we call it a Seder. That's what he says in the name of his grandfather. Now I'm going to continue because he goes to a totally different idea. Why did we leave Egypt quickly, he says. Remember, we left, you had to have your staff in your hand and your sandals on your feet, because at any moment they were going to leave Egypt, and they left Egypt at midnight after the Paschal offering and after the angel of death smote the firstborn of the Egyptians. He says, we left Egypt very quickly. However, it says that in the futuristic times, the Geulah, the final redemption, it says, Ki lo b'chipazot teitzeu. It will not happen quickly. So if it says, B'lo b'chipazot teitzeu about the future, then why do we have to leave Egypt so quickly? Is Isaiah in 52:12, who says, Ki lo b'chipazon teitzeu, that you shall not leave in haste. Meaning when the redemption comes, it'll go in an orderly fashion, step by step, and not necessarily quickly. And whereas Egypt, we didn't even have time to let the bread leaven. And that's why we eat the matzah, to remind us of this redemption from Egypt, at least one of the reasons, or the main reason, really. So the matzah represents the redemption in that sense. So he says, why do we have to leave Egypt hurriedly? He says, well, as the Midrash says, the Jews were not on a level where they had actually merited the redemption. You know, when the people of Israel are in diaspora in general, we're always influenced by the cultures from where we live. And unfortunately, it even tarnishes our understanding of our Judaism, the cultures and the religions among who we are. It's a little bit hard to stop that. It's just a matter of fact of life. You even have religious Jews who are influenced sometimes by non-Jewish practice in religion without even realizing it. Definitely, you can see that among people who are what we call newcomers to Judaism, Balei Tshuva, that sometimes they think that they are doing stringencies and they don't realize that they are copying other religions. But getting back to this, the Midrash says that the Jews in Egypt had descended to the 49th rung down of the ladder. Just like there are 50 levels going up, there are 50 levels going down, but when you hit the 50th level going down, you're gone. It's like your spiritual world has been destroyed. It says that the Israelites in Egypt, because they were slaves, because they were falling apart, they went down to the 49th level of impurity. And it says that when we left Egypt, when God took us out, and we came to the Red Sea, and of course the Egyptians were drowned and Israel was saved, the angel said to God, "Why are you saving the Israelites and drowning the Egyptians? These are idol worshipers, and these guys are idol worshipers. What's the difference?" A very, very tough rabbinic interpretation, Midrash. Now, where can we even see that? To say such a thing? When Moses came to the elders of Israel, they believed in the one God. Yes, the Jews did believe in the one God, but they were still influenced by Egyptian society. Remember, the sin of the golden calf, even though only 3,000 people were involved in the sin of the golden calf, but despite this, how do I know 3,000, by the way, were involved? Because when Moses says to the tribe of Levi to kill anybody who worshiped the golden calf, it was 3,000 people. But it was 3,000 people out of close to 2 million. Remember, according to Bamidbar, beginning of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, there were 600,000 Israelites between the ages of 20 and 60 who could be in the military. Then, of course, you had children. And then you had women, and women are very often slightly more than men, or at least equal to. Then you had the mixed multitude. So we're talking about close to 2 million people. If only 3,000 were involved in the sin of the golden calf, that's a very small percentage. However, the others, in their silence, were accomplices. In that sense, why in their silence were they accomplices? Because this is what they saw in Egypt all the time. So they thought, well, if Moses is gone, we're not sure what to do. Maybe we should stand and watch and see what happens. So the fact that they did not protest and oppose, this is considered a sin by itself. And this, of course, as Judah Levi is going to write in the 11th century, this is sort of understandable for people who had gone in for 200 years in the Egyptian culture, that they would consider this totally normal. And even though they came from a different belief system. But anyhow, getting back to this, the Midrashim seem to imply the Jews did not deserve to leave Egypt. So that's why God had to take us out in haste, says the Rebbe of Gur, because so that there should not be criticism. You just do it and you don't wait. But then he goes on and he says an interesting idea. Since leaving Egypt happened very quickly because we were not deserved of this, therefore we now have to try to figure out every year when we tell the story of the Exodus on Pesach, every year we have to find out what the reasons are that God took us out of Egypt. Like Rashi said, when we say ba'avor zeh, when we say for this, we mean that God took us out in order to keep his commandments. So that's looking for one of the reasons. And also we praise him this night. And we praise him this night by looking for the reasons of that redemption. And when we discover all the reasons of why God took us out of Egypt, then we will be worthy of God giving us the futuristic redemption. because we will be able to worship him in truth. As it says, and I took you out of Egypt to be your God. And this will happen in futuristic times in the eventual redemption. And all the questions and all the answers will be answered. So God took us out because God knew our potential. So the reason he took us out was based on that potential, but we have to discover that potential and we have to look for it and try to understand it. And the more we develop that potential, the more we become that people that God wanted when he took us out of Egypt, this justifies the redemption and that brings the eventual redemption of the Jewish people. Okay, that's part 2 of his interpretation. Now, this is part 3. This part I find the most fascinating, even though I thought that was spectacular till now. Bezem Remes, and this is the hint of the 4 sons. Let me explain. There is the motto of the evening is number 4. Why number 4? Because when Moses is at the burning bush, God says to him at the beginning of the book of Shemot, Exodus, I heard the screams and the plight of my people Israel. And then he says to Moses, it's called the 4 expressions of redemption. I shall take you out of the burdens of Egypt. I shall save you from the labor. I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm. And I shall take you to me, unto me as a people. These are called the 4 expressions of redemption. Because of those 4 expressions of redemption at the Seder night, we have 4 cups of wine. Every cup of wine representing a toast, if you want to put it that way, and thanks for every one of the expressions of redemption. There's actually a 5th expression, which is, I shall bring you to the land. Because of that, we have Kos Eliyahu, the goblet of wine put in the Seder table for Elijah. And there are even those who have a custom of drinking a 5th cup. That's in the Haggadah of Rav Menachem Kasher. He claims it's based on the Maharal of Prague. Anyhow, but the idea of a 5th cup. But everybody has the Elijah cup, which sort of represents a 5th cup, and is a futuristic idea, Elijah who pronounces the coming of the Messiah. So that's the first 4 expressions of redemption, and paralleling that, the 4 cups of wine. Then we have a second 4. It's called the 4 sons, because the 4 sons, there are 4 places in the Torah, 3 of them in which the child asks a question, there's an answer, and the 4th one where there's an answer with no question. So the Haggadah calls that the 4 sons. The one that has the question, that has the answer with no question, is the son, of course, who doesn't know how to ask. The one who says, Mazod, what is it, is the simple son, of course. The one who says, why do you need this burden, is the rebellious son. And the one who wants to know all the different precepts that we're supposed to do is the wise son. So you have the 4 sons. And paralleling the 4 sons, you have the Manishtana, the 4 questions, because the 4 questions originally were written as a formula in the Talmud. If the child doesn't know what to say, you teach them the 4 questions. So obviously the 4 questions parallel the 4 sons. By the way, if you look at the original 4 questions, they also parallel the central themes of the night of Passover, because the first question has to do with the matzah, which represents redemption. The second question has to do with the maror, which represents the enslavement in Egypt. The third question originally in the Mishnah had to do with the Paschal offering, which represented the idea that God passed over, the angel of death passed over the houses of the Israelites and smote the firstborn of the Egyptians. And then the final question was why we dip twice, which is where we create this idea of feeling freedom because we create the meal of the free man, which I'm not going to talk about at this moment. Today, where we don't have the question on the Paschal offering, instead we have the question about reclining Misubim. But basically, you have two sets of fours. The four expressions of redemption, the four cups of wine, that's one pair. And the second one is the Manishtan of the four questions and the four sons, but they're actually related to each other. Now I come to the Spater method. And he says, and this is the hint of the four sons. Why are there four sons? According to doubts that a human being has in their hearts, where he says the hearts of the children of Israel, this represents the four sons. The four sons are four types of doubts that every Jew could have in their hearts, because they're different people. People are people, and everybody has their issues, and everybody has their doubts. And that's on the individual level. Kach yesh galut b'Mitzrayim. And this is the exile of Egypt that follows us. It's called the skepticism or the doubts of the four sons in the hearts of people. And every year, the final redemption, based on the earlier redemption, is aroused. And these doubts become clarified until the time comes and everything will be all the doubts will be answered. And the verse will say, you shall not leave in haste, but it will be an actual redemption, which will go in the right order, slowly but surely. So he actually says two things. There are four doubts in the hearts of the Jewish people, and this is represented by the four sons. And this is the lingering exile of Egypt that is with us. And then he says there are also four doubts of the exile on the national level. But let me take the individual level. What does it mean? What are the doubts? Why doesn't he enumerate them? Why doesn't he clarify them? He just says there are four doubts. So I'm going to try to attempt to explain what I think might be the four doubts. And if it's a hierarchy going from the wise son to the rebellious son to the simple son to the one who doesn't know how to ask, I'll start the opposite way. Going up. What is the son who does not know how to ask? What is that? There are people who don't even see the issue. We know what the world is. You work, make money, you can get married, you can accomplish things, you can build buildings. That's the world. It's a material world. And it's, there are some people who live in fantasy of other things, but the world is the world. Everybody knows what it is. About 12 years ago, I met somebody who had come from England. Of course, I've been involved in Giyur and conversion for a number of years. And it was an interesting story. This was a woman whose brother was a Jew studying in yeshiva here in Israel. And she was not Jewish. Of course, it was her half-brother. Her father had remarried a Jewish woman, and this younger brother was from the second marriage. And of course, they were in touch, and she came to Israel and wanted to convert. I remember saying to her, here you are coming to Israel, wanting to convert to Judaism, which is very noble. But at that time in England, two books had become very popular. One book written by Richard Dawkins, the scientist and evolutionist, and the second one by Christopher Hitchens, and both books were attacking religion very vehemently. I said to her, what do you think about these books? She said to me, people like Richard Dawkins and the other one, they don't understand where the spiritual journey is. That's it. I thought about her answer for a while. I thought it was interesting. It's true, you have different types of people. You see, the world actually is a physical world. That's how we live in it. Simulation or not, but that's how we live in it. And we have to live in it that way. There's no other way to live in it. And this is the way we understand it, through our eyes, through our ears, through our nose, through our mouth, through the sense of touch. This is the world that we come across. And we know basically what we have to do to survive. And there are no glitches. The world works 100%. And therefore, it's not unusual for somebody to come to the conclusion that this is a material world and you live and you die, and period. Because that is the way we perceive it, 100%. So it's very understandable that people see the world as a net conglomerate of physicality and nothing more. That is the son who doesn't know how to ask, which means there are people who just don't see anything more. What else is there in life? That's called the first step. It's a material world. What do they want from me? Everything else is fancy. I'm talking fact, you're talking fancy. Fantasy. So, but then you have the second level. It's called the simple son. The simple son starts feeling like there must be something more to this world. What is this absurdity that we're born into a world in order to die? And then we have to live to survive and accomplish some things that somebody will take over and gain money that we can't take with us. Build businesses that somebody else will ruin eventually when we're gone. Oh, what is the point of it all? Something very absurd. If you know the famous essay of the late Rabbi Milton Steinberg, was a conservative rabbi in New York City. And he said there's a certain absurdity to life. Everything you love, everyone you love in this world, you're going to have to let go. In a famous article, a famous sermon he wrote called Hugging with Open Arms. It's the absurdity of life. We love in order to lose. We live in order to die. How do you make sense of such an absurdity, if not that there's something else going on? The Tam, the simple son, feels that there's something else going on. Simple child. But they can't put their finger on it. They just feel that there's something else and they want to know. It can't be that this is the sum total of life. It doesn't make sense. Then the higher level, I call it the higher level, but you might argue that point, is the rebellious son. What do I mean by that? The rebellious son, in my opinion, was somebody who grew up in a family where he was taught that there's something else. But he was taught in a way that antagonized him. It was forced upon him. He was taught a narrow point of view. There is something else, and that something else is more important. Therefore, forget about everything else. Forget about materialism. Don't try to accomplish your dreams. When you stagnate a person, when you force them into the corner in the name of religion, of course they're going to rebel. What do you expect? Because they feel that there's an imbalance. Even if you believe that there's something greater, you have to learn how to live with the balance because we're supposed to be in this world. And you can't STEMmy questions. The mind is there to question. That's why God gave us intelligence. And to try to understand the world around us and work within this world. The Hasidim used to call it Inwelt Oiswelt. You have to have an awareness of transcendence while you are living in the world. But you still have to live in the world. But if you push children to a corner and you close their minds and you force them to do things stemming their free will, of course they're going to rebel. So what I call the rebellious son is somebody who was introduced to all these concepts, but said to themselves as this is what these concepts bring me to stifle life, to keep us away from everything, to teach us narrow-mindedness. Who needs it? If that's what religion is going to teach us, and we know there are a lot of people who teach religion in very, very extreme ways, who think that being religious is being intolerant, who think that being religious is being God's angel of death in extreme fashion. So especially young people can be swayed and And so in those cases, it's almost healthy to be rebellious. That's how I see the rebellious son. He's asking all the right questions against the wrong representatives of religion. If he would get the right question, the right answers, he actually might change his point of view. The highest level is called a chacham, the smart son. The smart son is able to understand the balance, has able to understand how this understanding of transcendence can actually enrich my life. And now he wants to know what to do. Tell me what the tradition says about how to implement it in my life, because I think I got the point and I want to try it. That's 4 levels, in my opinion. He doesn't say, but you have to speculate because he doesn't give us the answer. Then he says, in his opinion, then he says, there are also 4 types of doubts representing the 4 exiles, which also represents the 4 expressions of redemption. Now, the question is, how do the 4 exiles represent 4 doubts? So I'm going to try to speculate on that too, because again, he doesn't tell us. What are the 4 redemptions? And many of our traditions of 4 redemptions are from the 4 exiles. The first exile is called Babylonia, because from Egypt we emerged as a people. So the first one is Babylonia, the second one is Persia, the Esther story, the third one is Greece, the fourth one is Rome. That's what we find very often in Midrashim, even though there are commentators who, like Ibn Ezra, who understand it slightly differently. So let's try to figure out. When the Jews came into Babylonia, into the exile of Babylonia from Nebuchadnezzar. So when the Jews first came into the Babylonian exile, it says they said to Ezekiel the prophet, chapter 20 in Ezekiel, verse 32, are we now of understanding that God broke his covenant with us and that's why we're thrown into exile? Does it mean we don't have to keep the Torah, that we don't have to be the people of God anymore? We're supposed to be like everybody else. And Ezekiel answers them and says, Ha'oleh al ruchachem halo lo tiyeh. What you are thinking and pondering is not going to happen. That which you say, we shall be like the rest of the nations. This is what God says. If you even think that, I will reign over you with an iron fist, with anger, because that's not what's going to happen. You remain my people. And Hosea also says that. Eze sefer kritut. What type of divorce contract could I possibly give your mother? Your mother meaning the Assembly of Israel, Knesset Israel. So the doubt that Jews had in Babylonia is, what are we supposed to do? We're usually in our country, we don't have that. We don't have a king, we don't have a temple, we don't have Jerusalem. Maybe we're supposed to be a nation like all other nations. That was the doubt that they had to deal with. And finally, after the 70 years, when Cyrus, the king of Persia, told them they could come into the Israel, it was difficult for them. Meaning they understood this, okay, we're supposed to remain the people of God. We understand that. But when Cyrus says, but now you can actually go back to Jerusalem, they were in shock. Most of the Jews didn't. Zerubbabel went, and Ezra, and Nehemiah. Most of the Jews remained in Babylonia. They weren't sure, this is the redemption? This is what's supposed to happen? That's the second doubt. Okay, maybe I'm supposed to remain the people of God, but am I supposed to be back in my land all over again? If God threw us out, now we go back? Is that what's happened? But that's what Jeremiah said, 70 years. But that's the second doubt. It took them a long time to come around to this idea that, yes, you're supposed to go back. The third doubt is called the Greeks. And the Greeks had the Jews in the land of Israel. The temple was standing. However, they defiled the temple and wanted to introduce their pagan religion. In other words, you can remain Jews in the land. You can remain with a quasi-sovereignty if you want, but we want you to take over our religion. And the Jews thought, okay, maybe we can remain in the land and keep Jerusalem and our own sovereignty. Maybe it's worth the price. And then, of course, you had the Maccabean revolt, and that was history. So That was called the third doubt. And then the fourth doubt is called the doubt of the Roman Empire, because when the Romans destroyed the temple, and they destroy Jerusalem and they throw the Jews into exile, it looks like a never-ending exile. The doubt of the finding exile is, can we ever pull ourselves together again? Can we ever go back to the land again? Do we have the ability to reintroduce ourselves back into the land of Israel as a people of God? And how do we survive until that happens? How is the survival of the exile possible? It's so long. So I call it the four doubts. Those are the four doubts of the Galiot. So they're just as there are doubts of the individual, there are doubts of the nation as a nation. So if we listen to the words of the Rebbe of Gur, there's something very fascinating about this. He says, let me sort of put it all together now. We left Egypt because God saw the potential of the people of Israel. So he pulled us out quickly. He also told Abraham that that's what would happen, that after those 400 years, we would be taken out since the birth of Isaac. But he's saying that two things happen. On the individual level, we have questions and doubts that we have to work on. That's called the four sons. On the national level, we have questions and doubts we have to work on. And when we are able to clarify the self-identity, the self-knowledge and the self-understanding on the individual, on the national level, then we will be worthy of being redeemed. And when we are worthy of being redeemed, it'll happen, and it'll happen in its proper stage, its proper time. It will not have to be with haste, because we will already set the stage in a proper way, and the rest will be clear sailing. I wish everybody Chag Sameach, Shalom, Shalom.